Before we descend into the shadows of international espionage, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The world of intelligence moves fast, and you won't want to miss our next deep dive into the operations that shape history. The most successful operation is not the one you read about in the morning papers. It is not the car explosion that rattles windows in Damascus, nor is it the daring raid that leaves empty safes in Tehran. The true masterpiece of tradecraft is the event that never happened. It is the history that remains unwritten because there was no one left to hold the pen. In the sterilized, fluorescent-lit corridors of Tel Aviv's intelligence headquarters, there is a saying passed down from case officer to field agent: noise is failure. When a mission ends with sirens, police investigations, and diplomatic cables flying between capitals, it means the primary objective, invisibility, was compromised. The goal of the Institute for Intelligence and Special Operations, known simply as Mossad, has always been to manipulate the course of events while leaving the water entirely undisturbed. This story concerns an operation that officially does not exist. It involves a man we will call Samir al-Fayed, a name that appeared on the red page, the authorization for elimination, in the winter of 1998. Al-Fayed was not a soldier. He did not carry a rifle or plant devices on buses. He was something far more dangerous. He was a logistician, a silent engineer, similar to the figures Mossad had hunted for decades. He moved money. He moved influence. And most critically, he moved the specific electronic components required for guidance systems from European markets into the hands of hostile entities in the Levant. For 3 years, the agency had watched him. They knew his coffee order in Vienna, his tailor in Milan, and the specific rhythm of his walk. But watching was no longer enough. The decision had been made to stop him. However, Al-Fayed operated in the polite society of Western Europe. He attended the opera. He dined with bankers. He held dual citizenship. To eliminate him with violence would trigger a geopolitical storm Israel could not afford. The mission parameters were handed down to a unit that exists in the space between myth and classified files, often referred to as Caesarea. The order was simple yet impossibly complex. Al-Fayed had to cease functioning. But there could be no bullet holes, no toxins that a standard autopsy would detect, and absolutely no witnesses who could testify to foul play. The objective was to create a natural end to a life that had become an unnatural threat. The team selected for this undertaking understood that they were not merely soldiers. They were stage magicians. Their job was to construct a reality for the observers, the police, the coroner, the hotel staff, that concealed the truth. As with the hunt for the Hamas commander aboard the train to Rome, the weapon would not be a gun, but the ability to make violence look like anything else. This is how they prepared to make a man disappear while the world watched. The first step in a witnessless mission is the erasure of the operatives themselves. Long before Al-Fayed would take his final breath, 3 people had to cease to exist, replaced by phantoms constructed from paper and ink. Avner, the team leader, sat in a safe house in a quiet suburb of Brussels. On the table before him lay the tools of his rebirth: a Canadian passport, a driver's license from Ontario, and a weathered library card. For the next month, he would become David Miller, an architectural consultant specializing in historic renovations. The legend, the cover story, had to be flawless. It wasn't enough to have the papers. The identity had to withstand the scrutiny of a bored customs officer or a suspicious hotel clerk. Mossad's technical department had spent months backstopping these identities. If someone called the number on David Miller's business card, a receptionist in Toronto would answer. If they checked his credit history, they would find years of mundane transactions: gas stations, grocery stores, subscription renewals. This level of detail echoed the deep cover operations of the 1960s, where agents like Wolfgang Lotz lived entire fabricated lives to penetrate enemy circles. But modern surveillance had made the game harder. The digital footprint had to match the physical one. David Miller had an email history, a travel profile, and a digital ghost that had been browsing architectural forums for 2 years. Joining Avner were 2 other specialists. Sarah, a woman with the chameleon-like ability to be instantly forgettable, would pose as a corporate event planner. Her role was surveillance and proximity. She needed to get close to Al-Fayed, to invade his personal space without triggering his defensive instincts. Then there was Eitan, the technician. His luggage did not contain clothes, but rather the specialized tools of the trade: lockpicks, cloning devices for keycards, and encrypted communication gear disguised as standard consumer electronics, a technique refined during the Dubai operations. The target, Samir Al-Fayed, was currently in Geneva, but intelligence indicated he would soon be moving to Budapest for a series of meetings. Budapest offered a unique operational environment. It was a city of shadows, of grand hotels with old plumbing and thick walls, and a police force that, while competent, was often overwhelmed. The team deployed separately. They flew commercial, taking circuitous routes to avoid pattern recognition algorithms. They did not sit together. They did not acknowledge each other. To the casual observer in the departure lounge, they were strangers. This discipline was absolute. A single shared glance could unravel a safety net that had taken millions of dollars to weave. Upon arrival in Budapest, they did not go to the target. They went to ground. They rented apartments in different districts, paying cash or using credit cards linked to their cover identities. They waited. This is the part of espionage the movies ignore. The silence. The waiting. The crushing boredom that must be endured with high alertness. They were ghosts waiting for a body to inhabit. They began the process of soaking the environment. Avner walked the streets around the Kempinski Hotel, where Al-Fayed was scheduled to stay. He noted the security cameras, the shift changes of the doorman, the traffic patterns. He needed to know the rhythm of the street better than the people who lived there. He needed to know that the bakery van arrived at 04:30 and that the street sweepers passed at 05:15. These mundane details were the variables that could turn a perfect mission into a catastrophe. In the world of intelligence, a witness isn't just a person. A camera is a witness. A digital log is a witness. A discrepancy in a timetable is a witness. To ensure there were no witnesses, the team had to control every variable in the environment. They were building a stage set where Al-Fayed would perform his final act, and every prop had to be in place. Samir Al-Fayed arrived in Budapest on a rainy Tuesday. He traveled with the arrogance of a man who believes his money buys him immunity. He had bodyguards, yes, 2 large men who looked like they were carved from granite, but he treated them as accessories rather than necessities. Sarah, operating under her cover as the event planner, had checked into the hotel 2 days prior. She was not on the same floor as Al-Fayed, that would be too obvious, but she was positioned in a room that allowed her to monitor the elevators. Her role was to build the pattern of life. Intelligence work is an exercise in pattern recognition. Every human being, no matter how paranoid, follows a script. We sleep, we eat, we bathe, we check our phones. We are creatures of habit. Al-Fayed was no different. Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv had already provided the broad strokes, but the field team needed the fine grain. They learned that Al-Fayed liked his coffee black and delivered to his room at 07 or sharp. They learned that he dismissed his bodyguards at 22:01, preferring privacy for his late-night calls. They learned that he had a mild heart condition for which he took medication, a detail that would become the pivot point of the entire operation. This specific vulnerability was the key. Just as in the elimination of the Hamas commander in Dubai or the operation on the train to Rome, the goal was to use the target's own biology against him. If a man with a heart condition dies of cardiac arrest, no one asks questions. The police see a tragedy, not a crime scene. The family sees a medical inevitability, not an assassination. Eitan, the technician, set to work on the electronic surveillance. He didn't need to bug the room. That was too risky. Instead, he compromised the hotel's network. Using a laptop in the lobby, he created a digital tunnel that allowed him to monitor the electronic keycard logs. He knew every time Al-Fayed's door opened and closed. He knew when the maid service entered. He effectively turned the hotel's own management system into a member of the Mossad team. For 3 days, they did nothing but watch. They needed to be certain. Was there a variable they had missed? Was there a hidden camera in the hallway? Did Al-Fayed have a backup meeting protocol? On the 4th day, a complication arose. Al-Fayed met with a man unknown to Israeli intelligence. He was a European, nondescript, carrying a briefcase. They met in the hotel bar. Avner watched from a distance, sipping a mineral water. The conversation was intense. Al-Fayed looked agitated. This was the X factor. In the story of the Champagne spy, Wolfgang Lotz survived because he could read the emotional states of the generals he deceived. Avner had to do the same now. Was this new man a threat to the operation? Was he another intelligence agent, or simply a business rival? The team held a crisis meeting via encrypted text bursts. No voice calls. Voice can be analyzed. Text is just data. Avner, target agitated, unknown subject contact. Sarah, subject left, via side exit, no tail. Eitan, I can track his phone if we get close. They decided to hold. Patience. The impulse to act is the enemy of the professional. They let the unknown man go. They refocused on Al-Fayed. They realized that his agitation might actually work in their favor. Stress places a load on the heart. Anger raises blood pressure. The target was priming himself for the weapon they intended to use. The plan was solidified. They would not take him on the street, where cameras and bystanders were uncontrollable variables. They would not take him in a restaurant. They would take him in the one place where he felt completely safe, the one place where he locked the world out, his own room. But entering a locked room in a high-security hotel without leaving a trace of forced entry is an art form that rivals the most complex illusions. It required a mastery of physical bypass techniques that Caesarea operatives practiced until their fingers bled. The lock on the door of Suite 402 was a Ving card system, electronic, encrypted, and theoretically unpickable. To the average thief, it was a fortress. To Eitan, it was a math problem. The problem with electronic locks is that they rely on data, and data can be cloned. In the Dubai operation against Mahmoud al-Mabhouh, agents reprogrammed the lock to accept a cloned key while not disabling the original, ensuring the target would not suspect his room had been compromised. Eitan planned to do exactly this. The opportunity came when the housekeeping staff did their rounds. Eitan, dressed in a maintenance uniform that he had acquired, stolen from a laundry cart in the basement, walked the hallway with a toolbox. He wasn't aiming for Al-Fayed's room yet. He was aiming for the maid's cart. He needed the master key card, just for a second. As the maid worked in room 405, her cart sat in the hall. Eitan stopped, pretending to check a light fixture. In one fluid motion, he swiped a cloning device over the key card sitting on the top tray of the cart. It took 2 seconds. The device beeped silently against his palm. He had the code. He returned to the safe house to analyze the data. He didn't just have a key, he had the algorithm. He could now generate a key card that would open Suite 402, but more importantly, he could program it to leave no record in the lock's internal memory. When the police eventually interrogated the lock, and they would, it would say that no one had entered the room except Al-Fayed. This is the essence of the witnessless mission. The corruption of the evidence before the crime is even committed. Meanwhile, Sarah was closing the net on the physical routine. She had established that Al-Fayed left his room for dinner at 20 UUs and returned at 22:30. This gave the team a 2.5-hour window. It sounded like a lifetime, but in operational terms, it was a blink. They had to enter, stage the scene, place the delivery system, and exit. The delivery system was not a gun. It was a chemical compound, a derivative of succinylcholine or perhaps a sophisticated opiate blend, similar to what was used in other high-profile quiet eliminations. The substance had to be absorbed through the skin or ingested, acting rapidly to depress respiratory function and stop the heart. It had to degrade quickly in the bloodstream, leaving behind chemical markers that were indistinguishable from normal metabolic decay or the byproducts of heart medication. Avner chose a method that was intimate and terrifyingly simple. They would tamper with the personal items Al-Fayed used immediately before bed. The toothbrush? Too uncertain. The water bottle? He might not drink. The medication itself? Al-Fayed took heart pills. Every night. If the team could replace one of those pills with a look-alike containing the toxin, Al-Fayed would kill himself. He would perform the assassination with his own hand. But there was a risk. What if he didn't take it that night? What if he noticed the pill looked slightly different? They decided on a redundancy. A contact poison would be placed on the item he was guaranteed to touch, the reading glasses he left on the nightstand. The transdermal toxin would induce grogginess and cardiac stress. When he felt the symptoms, he would reach for his heart medication. He would take the tainted pill. The combination would be lethal and rapid. The plan relied on the target's own survival instinct driving him toward his death. It was a psychological trap as much as a physical one. The tension in the safe house was palpable. They were about to execute a man using nothing but his own routine. If it worked, it would be a masterpiece of the invisible art. If it failed, they would be murderers trapped in a hotel in Central Europe. Operational planning is linear, reality is chaotic. On the night of the operation, the team moved into position. Avner and Eitan were in the hotel, dressed as guests. Sarah was in the lobby, the early warning system. Al-Fayed left his room at 1955. Perfect. He took the elevator down. He walked out to his waiting car. The bodyguards followed. The suite was empty. Green light. Sarah signaled via the encrypted device. Avner and Eitan moved to the 4th floor. The hallway was empty. The carpet swallowed their footsteps. Eitan swiped the cloned card. The light turned green. No click. Just the soft whir of the servo motor. They were in. The room smelled of expensive cologne and stale tobacco. They didn't touch the light switches. They used low-lumen tactical lights. Eitan moved to the bathroom. He located the medication bottle. He worked with tweezers, his hands steady as a surgeon's. He removed 3 pills and replaced them with the fabrications they had brought from Tel Aviv. The counterfeits were identical in weight, color, and texture. Avner moved to the nightstand. He applied the transparent gel to the nose pads of the reading glasses. It was odorless, invisible. They were 5 minutes into the operation. They had 20 minutes allotted. Then the earpiece crackled. It was a single pulse tone. The abort signal. Target returning. Sarah's text flashed on their devices. Forgot phone. Panic is the amateur's reaction. Freezing is the novice's reaction. The Mossad team reacted with fluid, rehearsed speed. They were trapped. The elevator was bringing Al-Fayed back up. He would be at the door in 90 seconds. They couldn't leave. The hallway was long. If he stepped out of the elevator while they were exiting the room, they would be seen. Being seen was failure. Closet, Avner whispered. It was a desperate move. The closet drill is something agents learn, but pray never to use. It relies on the target not checking the space. They slipped into the walk-in wardrobe. It was tight. They pressed themselves against the back wall behind a row of suits. They controlled their breathing. They slowed their hearts. The door to the suite opened. Al-Fayed walked in. He was muttering to himself. He sounded annoyed. The agent stood 3 feet away from him, separated only by a louvered wooden door and a layer of wool fabric. They could hear him breathing. They could hear the rustle of his clothes. Al-Fayed walked to the desk. He grabbed his phone. Then silence. He didn't leave immediately. He stood there. Had he sensed something? The human animal has an instinct for presence. When another predator is in the room, the hairs on the back of the neck stand up. Avner had his hand on a silenced pistol concealed under his jacket. This was the failure scenario. If Al-Fayed opened the closet, Avner would have to shoot. The silence would be broken. The clean, natural death would become a messy homicide. The mission would be blown. Witnesses, the guests next door, would hear the thud of the body or a cry for help. Al-Fayed's phone rang. The noise was deafening in the quiet room. "Yes," Al-Fayed answered in Arabic. "I have it. I'm coming down." He turned and walked out. The door clicked shut. Avner and Eitan exhaled, a synchronized release of tension that had built up in their chests. They waited another 60 seconds to ensure he wasn't coming back a second time. "We leave," Avner said. "Now." They slipped out of the room. The hallway was empty. They took the stairs, avoiding the elevator. They had planted the seeds of death. Now they had to vanish before they bloomed. They had survived the variable, but the close call served as a reminder. In the world of shadows, you are always seconds away from the light. The team relocated to a secondary observation point. a cafe across the street with a view of the hotel entrance. They needed to confirm Al-Fayed's return later that evening. They needed to see him walk in alive so they could know when the clock started ticking. The near miss in the room had rattled them, though they showed no outward sign. It reinforced the fragility of their control. They were playing gods, deciding the time of a man's death, but they were subject to the whims of chance. At 22:45, Al-Fayed returned. He looked tired. He rubbed his eyes. A good sign. The stress of the day was wearing on him. He walked through the revolving doors, his bodyguards trailing him. The package is delivered, Sarah noted. Now began the most difficult phase, the wait for the result. Unlike a sniper shot where the effect is instant, or a car bomb where the result is undeniable, this method required faith in the chemistry. Al-Fayed would go upstairs. He would prepare for bed. He would wash his face. He would pick up his glasses to read a report or a book. The toxin would enter his system. He would feel a tightness in his chest, a dizziness. He would recognize the symptoms of his condition. He would reach for his medication. He would swallow the pill that was designed to end him. The genius of the plan lay in the layering of causality. Even if a toxicologist found traces of the contact poison, it wouldn't be enough to kill. Even if they analyzed the pill bottle later, they would find mostly real pills. The lethal one would be inside him, dissolving, doing its work. It was the perfect closed loop. The target reacts to a threat, the poison symptoms, by taking the very thing that kills him, the tainted medicine. The team returned to their separate apartments. They did not sleep. They monitored the police bands. They monitored the hotel network. At 02 Waj, the hotel was quiet. At 03 Waj, silence. This was the dead time. If Al-Fayed called for help, if he managed to dial reception before he collapsed, the paramedics would arrive. They might save him. Or, if they failed to save him, they would be witnesses to his final moments. They might hear him say he was poisoned. The team needed him to die alone. Isolation was the final component of the weapon. By 04 Zaur, there were no sirens, no commotion at the hotel entrance. This meant one of two things. Either Al-Fayed was sleeping soundly, or he was dead. Avner stared at the ceiling of his rented room. He thought about the morality of the act. In the transcripts of the Fatih Shakaki assassination, the question was raised, is this justice or murder? To the operative, the question is irrelevant during the mission. The moral burden is carried by the policymakers who sign the red page. The operative is merely the instrument, but the instrument feels the weight. The silence of the city felt heavy. The sun began to rise over Budapest. The city woke up. Trams started running. The bakery vans arrived. The pattern of life resumed for everyone except, they hoped, one man in Suite 402. The mission was now in the hands of the morning maid service. The discovery of the body would be the final act of the play. The team had to be ready to move the moment the news broke. Or if the news was that Al-Fayed was alive and well, they had to be ready to abort and vanish. The silence of the night was over. The noise of the day was about to begin. And in that noise, they would find their answer. The morning in Budapest broke with a deceptive calm, the kind of gray, muted dawn that often shrouds the Danube in mist. For the city's inhabitants, it was simply Wednesday. For the three operatives known as Avner, Sarah, and Eitan, it was the moment of judgment. The previous night's tension had calcified into a cold, waiting silence. They were no longer active participants. They were audience members watching a play they had written, praying the actors would follow the script. At 8:15 a.m., the housekeeping cart rattled down the corridor of the fourth floor of the Kempinski Hotel. The maid, a woman named Ilona, checked her list. Suite 402 was marked for a standard refresh. She knocked 3 times. "Housekeeping," she announced, her voice routine, bored. There was no answer. She waited the prescribed 10 seconds, then unlocked the door with her master key, the same key Eitan had cloned days earlier, and pushed inside. From his vantage point in the cafe across the street, Avner watched the windows of the 4th floor. He wasn't looking for the maid. He was looking for the reaction. The timeline of a discovery is distinctive. If a guest is sleeping, the curtains stay drawn. If a guest is awake, there is movement. If a guest is dead, The stillness is eventually broken by a flurry of frantic activity. At over 8:17 a.m., Ilona backed out of the room. She didn't scream. Real shock often manifests as silence first. She moved quickly to her cart, picked up the phone, and dialed the front desk. Aitan, monitoring the hotel's internal network from his safe house, saw the alert flag pop up on the security dashboard. Code Blue, medical emergency, suite 402. It's happening, Aitan texted the group. Medical requested, not police, yet. This distinction was vital. A call for medical assistance meant the body looked intact. It meant there was no blood on the walls, no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture. It suggested that Al-Fayed looked like a man who had simply stopped breathing. The stage management had worked. The natural death was being accepted at first glance. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They rushed through the lobby with a stretcher. Avner watched them enter. He counted the minutes. If they rushed out with the patient, Al-Fayed might still be alive, clinging to existence. If they stayed up there for a long time, it meant resuscitation was being attempted on a corpse. If they came out slowly, with the sheet pulled up, the mission was physically complete. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Finally, a black van arrived at the side entrance. It was not an ambulance. It was the coroner's transport. Inside the suite, the scene was playing out exactly as the team had engineered. Al-Fayed lay in bed, the covers partially thrown back, as if he had tried to rise in the night. His reading glasses were on the nightstand. The water glass was half empty. The medication bottle was uncapped, a single pill missing from the dosage count. The police officers who arrived shortly after the paramedics saw a tragedy, not a crime. They saw a middle-aged man with a known heart condition who had likely suffered an event during the night. There was no forced entry. The lock log showed only Al-Fayed entering. There were no defensive wounds. The room was locked from the inside, the chain engaged. This specific detail, the chain, was the final flourish of Aitan's tradecraft. Using a high-tensile thread maneuvered from the outside, he had managed to slide the chain into its slot before pulling the thread free, sealing the room as effectively as if they had never been there. It is a technique as old as Houdini, but in the context of a high-stakes intelligence operation, it turns a murder into a locked-room mystery that has no solution. By 10 a.m., Al-Fayed's body was being wheeled out. The hotel manager was already worried about discretion, about protecting the reputation of the establishment. The police were filling out paperwork for a suspicious death, but their body language was relaxed. They weren't cordoning off the street. They weren't interviewing every guest. They were processing a statistic. The room without echoes had told its story, and the story was a lie. The second battleground of a witnessless mission is the pathology lab. The human body is a ledger, recording everything that happens to it. A bruise is a memory of impact. A laceration is a record of violence. To defeat the pathologist is to erase the memory of the body. The toxin selected for Al-Fayed was a masterpiece of pharmaceutical engineering. It belonged to a class of compounds known as vanishing agents. Unlike heavy metals like arsenic or thallium, which remain in hair and fingernails for years, this compound was organic. It mimicked the body's own chemistry. Specifically, it was designed to break down into metabolites that are naturally present in the human system after cardiac arrest. When the heart stops, the blood becomes acidic. Enzymes flood the tissues. The toxin accelerated this process, hiding its own footprint in the chaotic chemical noise of death. Dr. Kovac, the pathologist assigned to the case in Budapest, was a competent man. He had seen hundreds of heart attacks. When Al-Fayed's body lay on his steel table, he saw the classic signs: cyanosis of the lips, congestion in the lungs, the general pallor of cardiovascular failure. He ran the standard toxicology screen. He tested for alcohol, for common narcotics, for common poisons. The results came back clean. The team had anticipated this. In the planning phase, Mossad's medical experts had reviewed Al-Fayed's medical history. They knew he took beta blockers. They knew his potassium levels were monitored. The toxin they synthesized worked by spiking potassium levels rapidly, inducing an arrhythmia that stopped the heart, then dissipating. Dr. Kovac noted myocardial infarction as the preliminary cause of death. He noted the presence of the heart medication in the stomach contents, consistent with a man feeling chest pain and taking his pills in a desperate attempt to survive. The narrative was self-reinforcing. The pills were there because he took them. He took them because he was dying. He died because his heart failed. The circle was closed. However, there was one moment of danger. A junior assistant noticed a slight discoloration on the bridge of the nose, where the reading glasses had rested. It was a faint redness, a mild chemical irritation from the transdermal gel. "What is this?" the assistant asked, pointing to the mark. Dr. Covert peered through his spectacles. He saw a small abrasion. He wore glasses. Covert shrugged. He collapsed. Maybe the glasses pressed into the skin. Or perhaps a dermatological issue. He didn't swab it. Why would he? It looked like a friction mark. This is the fragility of the perfect crime. It relies not just on the skill of the killer, but on the indifference or assumptions of the investigator. If Covert had been suspicious, if he had ordered a mass spectrometry analysis of that specific patch of skin, he might have found a polymer residue. But suspicion requires a trigger. The lack of witnesses, the locked door, the medical history, everything screamed natural. The autopsy concluded at 16 WAM. The certificate was signed. Al-Fayed was officially dead of natural causes. The file was closed before it ever really opened. Back in their safe houses, the team received the single-word signal from Tel Aviv. Black. Black meant the cover held. It meant the death was accepted. It meant the mission was a success. But success is dangerous. Success makes you exhale, and exhaling makes you drop your guard. They were still deep in enemy territory, 3 ghosts who needed to fade away before anyone realized they had ever been there. Leaving is harder than arriving. When you arrive, you are a tourist with a future. When you leave, you are an operative with a secret. The psychological pressure to run is immense, but running attracts the eye. The predator must mimic the prey. They must leave with the slow, bored pace of travelers ending a vacation. The extraction protocol for Operation Silhouette, as it was internally designated, called for a starburst dispersal. The team would not leave together. They would not leave to the same destination. They would scatter to the winds. Aiton, the technician, had the most dangerous cargo. He carried the cloning device and the remaining chemical compounds. These could not be taken through airport security. The risk of a random swab or an X-ray anomaly was too high. His route was overland. He rented a car and drove west, crossing the border into Austria. The Schengen zone's open borders were a blessing for intelligence work. He stopped at a highway rest area near Vienna. In a trash compactor behind the service station, he disassembled the electronics, shattering the chips and scattering the pieces into different refuse bags. The remaining chemicals were neutralized with a binding agent and flushed. By the time he reached the Vienna airport for a flight to Zurich, he was clean. He carried nothing but clothes and a camera full of tourist photos he had snapped hastily in Budapest. Sarah took the train. The rail journey from Budapest to Prague is scenic and slow. She sat in a second-class carriage reading a book. She looked like a corporate planner, tired from a conference. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look over her shoulder. She let the landscape roll by, the tension of the last week slowly uncoiling in her stomach. The train is a sanctuary for the spy. It offers movement without scrutiny. There are no metal detectors, no passport control officers staring into your eyes to see if your pupils dilate. It is just you and the rhythm of the tracks. Sarah used the time to mentally deconstruct her cover. By the time she reached Prague, the event planner was fading. She was preparing to become Sarah again. Avner, the team leader, took the highest risk. He flew directly out of Budapest Ferihegi Airport. He had to face the Hungarian border police one last time. He stood in the queue, his Canadian passport in hand. He watched the officer in the booth. Stamp. Next. Stamp. Next. When it was his turn, he stepped forward. He smiled. Not too much, just a polite acknowledgement. The officer scanned the passport. The computer brought up the entry record. David Miller, arrived 4 days ago. Purpose, business. Did you enjoy your stay? The officer asked in broken English. This is the moment where amateur agents fail. They over-explain. They give too much detail to prove their innocence. It was productive, Avner said simply. Beautiful city. The officer nodded, bored. He stamped the passport. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper was the loudest noise Avner had heard in days. It was the sound of freedom. Safe travels. Avner walked past the booth. He didn't rush to the gate. He went to the duty-free shop. He bought a box of chocolates. It was a prop, a final layer of normalcy. As the plane lifted off the tarmac, climbing over the Danube, Avner looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, in a cold storage room, lay Samir Al-Fayed. The man who had moved missile guidance systems was now just paperwork. The threat had been neutralized without a single shot fired in anger, without a single witness to point a finger. The city of Budapest disappeared into the clouds. The extraction was complete. The ghosts had vanished. Chapter 10. The Diplomatic Fog. While the operatives returned to the shadows, the diplomatic fog began to roll in. This is the aftermath of a quiet assassination. It is a period of murmurs, cables, and unverified suspicions that circulate through the embassies and intelligence stations of the world. In the days following Al-Fayed's death, the ripple effects began to touch the intelligence community. The Syrians were the first to suspect. They knew Al-Fayed's health was manageable. They knew he was careful. His sudden death in a European capital, just weeks before a major shipment was due, smelled wrong to them. But suspicion is not proof. The Syrian intelligence station chief in Budapest sent a cable to Damascus. Target deceased. Cause listed as cardiac arrest. Circumstances suspicious, but site is clean. No evidence of hostile action. Shipment disrupted. That last phrase, shipment disrupted, was the only victory metric that mattered to Israel. In Washington, at the CIA headquarters in Langley, analysts noted the death. They cross-referenced Al-Fayed's file. They saw the Mossad interest markers. They put the pieces together. It looks like the Israelis cleaned house, a senior analyst likely remarked in a classified briefing. Clean, very clean. But the Americans would say nothing. Why would they? Al-Fayed was a proliferator of weapons technology. His removal served American interests as much as Israeli ones. This is the unwritten rule of the intelligence brotherhood. If the job is done well, and the target is a mutual problem, silence is the only response. In Paris, the French services, still stinging from the public embarrassment of the Atef Bissot assassination years earlier, checked their own logs. Was Al-Fayed in France recently? No. Did the Israelis use French passports? Unconfirmed. They breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't their mess this time. In Israel, the Prime Minister received a briefing. It was short. It did not contain names or operational details. It simply stated, "The strategic threat regarding the guidance components has been resolved." That was it. There were no parades. There were no medals. The red page was removed from the active binder and placed in the archives. This diplomatic fog is essential. It allows nations to maintain relations even while conducting shadow wars. It is the concept of plausible deniability weaponized. Israel could honestly say, "We have no knowledge of any operation in Budapest," and point to the Hungarian police report as proof. The Hungarians could say, "A man died of a heart attack," and protect their tourism industry. The Syrians could say, "We lost a patriot," without admitting their own incompetence in protecting him. The fog covers everyone. It is the grease that keeps the gears of geopolitics turning without grinding to a halt. But within the fog, the message was received loud and clear by Israel's enemies. The sudden natural death of a key logistician sends a chill through the network. Other arms dealers, other couriers, look at the news and wonder, is my heart strong? Is my food safe? Am I next? The psychological impact of a witnessless mission is often greater than a violent one. Violence you can fight, you can shoot back, but you cannot fight a heart attack. You cannot shoot a ghost. The fear of the invisible is the ultimate deterrent. Chapter 11. The Psychological Residue. For Avner, Sarah, and Eitan, the mission didn't end when they landed in Tel Aviv. It ended in the quiet moments that followed, in the psychological residue that clings to an operative like smoke. They returned to their real lives, or the closest approximation of them. Avner went back to his apartment in Herzliya. He watered his plants, which had wilted in his absence. He checked his mail. He went to the supermarket. There is a profound dissonance in standing in a checkout line, buying milk and bread, knowing that 48 hours ago you were hiding in a closet in Budapest, holding the power of life and death in your hands. It creates a separation from society. You look at the people around you, the civilians, and you realize they live in a world of rules and sunlight. You live in a world where those rules are suggestions, and the sunlight is something you hide from. Mossad psychologists call this identity dissolution. When you spend weeks building a legend, living as someone else, thinking their thoughts, eating their food, it is hard to shed that skin. David Miller, the architect, was a fiction, but he had felt real. Now he was dead, erased as surely as Al-Fayed. Sarah struggled with the intimacy of the act. She hadn't pulled a trigger, but she had facilitated the death. She had watched the man eat, breathe, and live, all while plotting his end. There is a specific kind of coldness required to dehumanize a target to that degree. Afterward, the humanity rushes back in. You wonder about his family. You wonder if he was afraid in those final moments. Eitan, the technician, focused on the mechanics to cope. He busied himself with new gadgets, new codes. For him, it was a puzzle solved. But even he felt the weight of the silence. They were debriefed, of course. Men in suits asked them about every minute, every decision. They analyzed the closet moment in excruciating detail. Lessons were learned, protocols were updated, but no one asked them how they felt. In the Institute, feelings are a liability. You box them up. You put them on a shelf. The team dissolved. They wouldn't work together again immediately. Standard protocol dictates rotating teams to prevent patterns from forming. They passed each other in the corridors of headquarters, exchanging brief nods. They shared a secret that they could never speak of, not to their spouses, not to their friends. They were the witnesses to the mission without witnesses. They carried the memory so that history wouldn't have to. This is the true cost of the Shadow War. It is not paid in budget allocations or diplomatic capital. It is paid in the fractured souls of the men and women who do the necessary, terrible things to keep their nation safe. They become the keepers of the dark, so others can live in the light. Chapter 12. The Unwritten History. History is written by the victors, they say. But in the world of intelligence, true victory is when history is not written at all. Samir Al-Fayed is a footnote. If you search for him today, you might find an obituary in a Lebanese newspaper praising his business acumen and his charity. You will find a Hungarian police report archived in a basement in Budapest, listed under non-criminal deaths, 1998. You will find a grave in Beirut. You will not find a chapter in the history books about the night 3 Israelis entered his room and stopped his heart. This operation, like the hunt for the Hamas engineer on the train or the quiet elimination of scientists in Tehran, is part of the unwritten history of the Middle East. It is the invisible scaffolding that holds up the visible events of the region. Why do so many Mossad missions end without witnesses? Because the alternative is war. If Israel had bombed the hotel to get Al-Fayed, civilians would have died. Hungary would have been outraged. Europe would have sanctioned Israel. Syria might have retaliated with missiles. A single violent act could have triggered a cascade of destruction. By choosing the path of silence, by choosing the scalpel over the hammer, the intelligence service bought time. They bought stability. They removed a threat without breaking the fragile veneer of peace. It is a dark utilitarianism, a grim calculus. But in a neighborhood as volatile as the Middle East, it is often the only way to survive. The story of the assassination of Samir Al-Fayed forces us to look at the world differently. It makes us question what we see on the news. When a key figure dies of a sudden illness, when a scientist disappears, when a boat sinks in calm waters, is it tragedy or is it tradecraft? The machine of silence continues to run. Somewhere in the world right now, as you listen to this, a team is planning. They are forging passports. They are cloning keys. They are watching a target and learning his pattern of life. They are preparing to edit history, to remove a paragraph so skillfully that no one will ever know it was there. The train still runs to Rome. The hotels in Dubai still welcome guests. The streets of Budapest are still gray in the morning mist. The world moves on, oblivious to the secret wars fought in its shadows. And perhaps that is the greatest success of all. If this journey into the invisible world of Mossad operations fascinated you, If you want to understand the mechanics of the events that never officially happened, make sure to subscribe. We are just scratching the surface of the classified files. Hit that like button if you believe the truth is worth digging for. Share this story with someone who needs to know how the world really works. And tell us in the comments, is the perfect crime justified if it prevents a war? Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know what you might be missing.